Today we are conducting a side-by-side experiment to test whether oxygenating a sugar wash affects fermentation performance. We'll be making two identical 30-litre washes with one crucial difference. One gets aggressive agitation, or aeration, while the other receives only standard mixing. We'll see if that extra oxygen makes a measurable difference to our fermentation. The extra oxygen we'll be stirring in will primarily benefit the yeast during their initial growth phase, helping them build strong cell walls and reproduce effectively. This typically leads to healthier, more vigorous fermentation at the start. However, once active fermentation begins and the yeast switch to their anaerobic metabolism, the additional oxygen becomes less beneficial and can even be counterproductive, potentially leading to increased ester formation or enabling acetobacter growth and converting our alcohol to vinegar. However, with this experiment, we'll be mostly concerned with the fermentation performance. The first rule of fermentation: everything that touches your wash needs to be sanitized. I'm using Starsan here, spraying down both fermentation buckets, lids, stirring implements and anything else that contacts the wash. Starsan is a no-rinse sanitizer that's perfect for this, although to be honest I'm using Stellarsan, which is a much cheaper clone. Starsan is an acid-based sanitizer, specifically a mix of dodecyl benzene sulfonic acid and phosphoric acid. At proper dilution, typically about 1.5 ml per litre, which is 0.15%, it creates a solution with a pH of around 2.5 to 3. That low pH is what kills bacteria and wild yeast in about 30 seconds. The beauty is that at this dilution, when it breaks down, the phosphoric acid actually becomes a yeast nutrient. You might notice Starsan creates a lot of foam. That foam is actually the sanitizer doing its job, and the small amount left in your fermenter won't hurt your fermentation. In fact, it can help. And while it's not recommended to rinse it away, I'm doing so with boiling water. I'm using it as a spray, which shouldn't be harmful, but you probably don't want to breathe it in, so I'm spraying at arm's length. Once diluted, it does start to break down, but you should get a few months of shelf life. It should be a bit cloudy and foam on contact, but the only reliable test is measuring its pH. We are currently measuring out 9 kilograms of dextrose for each wash. That's going to give us a potential alcohol of around 14 to 15% in our 30-litre volume. Technically, we should be making 23 litres with 7 kilos of dextrose, but if you watched my previous video, you'll know that stretching the recipe doesn't seem to hurt very much. And we have 30 litres of capacity, so why not use it? Dextrose is ideal for neutral spirit production. It ferments cleanly with minimal side products, or congeners. You can also use table sugar, but the result isn't as good. It is cheaper, however. Dextrose is a simple monosaccharide and is easily consumed by the yeast, where table sugar, or sucrose, first needs to be broken down into glucose and fructose with an enzyme by the yeast. This extra work puts a strain on the yeast, causing it to produce additional undesirable byproducts. You can boil a sugar solution in the presence of an acid, and this will cause the sucrose to split into fructose and glucose. This step will help you produce a better fermentation than plain sucrose, but dextrose is still considered superior. Adding boiling water serves a number of purposes here. It dissolves the dextrose quickly and completely, which saves a lot of effort over cold water. Boiling the water will also kill off anything we don't want affecting our final product. We also want to raise the temperature of the water for when we add the yeast. The heat also helps drive off chlorine from tap water, although this is not an issue for me as I'm using rainwater as I'm living in the country and don't have access to a town supply. It can be worth removing or reducing the chlorine content of water as it can affect the final flavour, and it's also antimicrobial and obviously not healthy for the yeast. This is of course the purpose of adding chlorine to water in the first place. Chlorine will naturally off-gas from water within 24 to 48 hours. Boiling water will remove the chlorine within 1 to 2 minutes. If you can't remove the chlorine, don't stress too much. Your yeast will survive, but may produce some off flavours. Rather than just using the kettle to boil water, I'm also using a couple of pots to speed things along. Even with the 240 volt power outlets we enjoy here in New Zealand, it can still be quite tedious to wait for the kettle to boil. As you can see, this dextrose is dissolving nicely, although there are still quite a few solids in this batch. In the other bucket, as you can see, it's now quite clear, although there were a few lumps still persisting, but these are easily removed with a bit of mixing. To finish off the remaining bucket, I'm just adding a bit more boiling water and mixing to dissolve the remaining sugar. Once everything is dissolved and our sugar solution is nice and clear, we will top up with cold water to bring the temperature down. We're aiming for around 25 to 30 degrees Celsius before pitching yeast. Too hot and will kill them, too cold and the fermentation will be sluggish. This is where having good temperature control really matters. I'll mix thoroughly to ensure even temperature distribution and no hot pockets that could damage our yeast. For the fermenter we're going to oxygenate, I'm going to temporarily take it up to 25 litres so that there's some space at the top to prevent me from splashing sugar solution everywhere. No foreshadowing present here at all. And then later we'll take it up to the 30 litres. For our less oxygenated wash, I've already topped it up to 30 litres and we are just going to make sure that everything is well mixed. This will introduce some additional oxygen, but not to the same level as our other batch. Now to start mixing in some additional oxygen. I'm not sure if a paint stirrer is such a great idea. I found it pretty hard to control, although no doubt with a bit of practice it could work quite well, if only I had thought that far ahead. And this video would not be complete without some additional gratuitous slow motion of me spraying the kitchen with sugar syrup. And the cleanup for this experiment was not insubstantial. We want to top up our wash to 30 litres with some additional water. You may also be able to see a few paint flecks in the wash. It's not leaded paint, so I'm sure it's fine. Both washes now get turbocarbon. Here is our oxygenated wash. This activated carbon helps absorb some of the extra things produced during fermentation, leading to a cleaner spirit. It also provides nucleation sites that help prevent foaming during fermentation. I've done a pre-stir to help mix it in as I add it. It also looks great in slow motion. Time for the Turbo Classic 6 yeast. The strain is selected for high alcohol tolerance and rapid fermentation. The Classic 6 yeast is regarded as a sweet spot between fermentation time and the quality of alcohol produced. Time to take the specific gravity measurements. Our oxygenated batch looks to be around 1.102 or 1.104. And our other batch around 1.100. In hindsight, it's better to take the gravity measurements before adding the carbon and yeast. Also, I think giving the wash a stir so that it's moving before adding the carbon and yeast helps mix things in. And here is the final stir before we seal things up, just to distribute the yeast and carbon evenly through the wash. Finally, adding the airlocks. They have been filled with boiled water and sprayed with Star San. And notice the labels to remind me of the parameters for this experiment. And we need to store away the remaining dextrose, which I actually did much earlier, but it didn't fit the narrative, so we've time traveled it here. Dextrose is hygroscopic, meaning it's eager to absorb moisture, so it's important to seal it away in an airtight container, otherwise it's going to interfere with your weight measurements. Both sugar washes have completed fermentation, finishing at essentially the same time, after 15 to 17 days. While I initially thought the oxygenated batch was fermenting more vigorously, based on the airlock activity, it was bubbling more frequently, I discovered a slightly confounding variable. The oxygenated bucket's lid was slightly concave, while the control was convex. This larger headspace meant that the control batch was releasing larger, less frequent bubbles, which I think evened things out. So for the numbers, the oxygenated batch started at a gravity of 1.102 and finished at 0.992, and the control batch 1.100 down to 0.990. Both achieved nearly identical drops in specific gravity, 110 points, resulting in approximately 15.4% ABV. The slight variation in gravity was likely due to minor measurement differences rather than the oxygenation treatment. If forced to choose, I'd give a marginal edge to the unoxygenated batch, though the difference is negligible. The aggressive oxygenation didn't produce any meaningful improvement in fermentation speed or gravity drop compared to standard mixing. This is, of course, a single trial experiment, so the results should be taken with appropriate skepticism. If I were to do a follow-up test, I'd consider using an aquarium air stone to provide continuous microbubble oxygenation during the first few hours, which might deliver more effective oxygen than mechanical stirring. For distilling at home, using a quality turbo yeast, I've saved the effort. Normal mixing seems to provide sufficient oxygenation. The yeast performs admirably without the extra aeration. Until next time, happy distilling.